Hey everybody, this is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another edition of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. We're releasing today's episode a day late, and I do apologize for that, but we had some technical difficulties on our end getting the podcast up and running this week. But I think today's episode will be worth the wait. Our topic today is home inspections and getting the perspective about home inspections from a retired home inspector. He was my inspector for years and years and years. His name is Steve Hendricks. Steve was an Ashi certified home inspector for 12 years, and the 30 years prior to that, he was in construction, he was in renovation, he did industrial maintenance. So Steve knows his way around properties inside and out. So this week, we're going to spend our time inspecting home inspections with Steve Hendricks, and we'll pick it up on the other side. My next guest, I've actually thought about having him on the podcast for a few years now, but I had to wait until he officially hung up his inspector boots, or I don't know what you would say, inspector belt, and actually retired so I could actually have him on the podcast. His name is Steve Hendricks, and I am excited to talk to him today about inspections because I think that is something that as agents, we all have questions about. We all are interested in what happens in inspections and from the point of view of the inspector. So, Steve, how you doing today, man? It's good to see you.
Yeah.
You're looking rested and well. Let's put it that way.
I am enjoying retirement. Thank you.
Now, just an aside to our listeners out there, you are very much a tree guy. You know all kinds of trees, all kinds of flora and fauna. How is your tree, I want to say tree business or tree tending business going for you in retirement?
Well, basically, I just work, on my own property as far as trees go. I like to tromp around in the woods quite a bit, but what I really do in my retirement now is carpentry work for other people.
Well, you were an inspector extraordinaire, and I wanted to start by saying that I've learned so many fascinating things from the inspections that you have done for me through the years. And as agents, the home inspection is one of the primary places that we learn about homes in general. When it comes to real estate, I feel like there's a few places that we truly learn things about homes in particular, and one is the inspection. And so things like how radon systems operate, what asbestos insulation looks like on old piping, what double taps are, what a weep screed is, or even how an on-site septic system works. That's one of the most fascinating inspections I think there is. It all takes years to become an expert. So how long did it take you to master the inspection process, number one? And what do you need to become an Ashi or NAHI certified inspector?
Okay, well, I am Ashi certified, or was until I retired. And it's a pretty laborious process. I started with being mentored by a certified Ashi inspector for several inspections, along with a lot of book work and mini tests you take online to learn. Eventually, I had to go to Allentown and take a national Ashi test and pass that. After I got past that, I got the lowest level certification, but it took me 250 inspections to become truly certified Ashi inspector, which took like another 9 months or so I got my total certification.
I think it's really amazing how in depth it is. I don't think people appreciate what you have to go through to actually be, a legitimate Ashi certified inspector, because we all know that, a lot of times buyers want to bring their Uncle Pete from down the street to the inspection and have them look over your shoulder the entire time. You truly are, the experts in the field. And I think that's really good for our agents to hear what goes into that, because it's definitely, like you said, a laborious process. What would you say is the hardest aspect of being a home inspector? What was the hardest part of your job from day to day?
Well, it's a lot of attention to detail. You'll go into a house and sellers don't want you to find what's wrong with their house, and they won't, not necessarily deceitful, but they'll conveniently place rugs and furniture to hide things that might not be right, or put a lot of boxes in the basement in front of water damaged areas. So knowing where to look, just to find out where there's certain places that are prone to have problems.
I would think that like going back to a seller's point of view, right? Especially in, I'm sure in certain cases, sellers are even home when you're doing an inspection. And that sounds horrible to deal with on a day-to-day basis. Are you, just a side note on that question, are you always concerned, and I guess you are from a home inspector point of view, when you leave a property, are you concerned about what you may have missed because something may be in the way? Like, do you ever second guess yourself that, I have to look, I should have looked here, or I should have moved this item, even though you're not supposed to move these things?
There's always a little bit of self-doubt involved. And in the inspector's defense, there are disclaimers that, we can't see through walls. If there's termite damage inside a wall that's covered with drywall, hey, we can't help that. But by and large, we're working for the customer, and there are signs of everything to see. But to answer your question, yes, we're not perfect.
Yeah, I think as agents, I think of us as the steps that we kind of go through when, we're in the progress of doing a real estate transaction, right? And there are sleepless nights that we have, that whether it's our timeline or whether we didn't do this or we didn't do that, there's always things that we think of in the back of our mind. So that's why I asked that question. So, why do you think it's important? Let me phrase this next question for you, in the sense that, so many buyers have waived their right to do a home inspection in the past few years, and it always makes me nervous. I understand from their point of view. When we bought our house a couple years ago in the pandemic, we had to waive our inspection. I actually had you out to do an inspection on my home after we settled. But I, have a more trained eye than the typical buyer does. I kind of knew what we were walking into, but there's always crazy stuff that pops up no matter what house you're buying. So why do you think it's important for buyers to have a home inspection when they're purchasing a home? That may be a very basic question, but why do you think it's important from an inspector's point of view?
As you said, you're hiring a trained eye to point out issues that the buyer would not necessarily notice. Buyers generally are looking at things that are not really as important. They're more cosmetic issues. I look, grassroots issues, foundation, support of, the house, decks, condition of roof, looking in the attic, looking for moisture issues. And that's the sort of thing you hire me that a layman might not notice. And I could point out and say, this might be a real problem. Don't worry so much about this.
Again, from my perspective, I think the word appear is very important as agents, because I can tell you, if I go down into a base, like I was just at a property, is split level, in Townsend Township, was built in the 1950s. If I go to the lower level, I'm pretty certain that there's asbestos tile in this house, right? That's on the floor. Yeah. But I am not an inspector, and I don't want to make any guarantees to what that is. So I will say it appears as though this may be asbestos tile, right? Yeah. But that's why we have to have you, the expert, come in there and do these things for us. I never speak in absolutes as an agent, even though I may think I know what I'm talking about. And I'm pretty sure, that's the case. That's why you're so important to a transaction and to a buyer in general. You've done this stuff for a very long time. We talked about what you need to go through to be a home inspector. I think you would have done probably thousands of inspections over the course of your career. So out of all the things that can go wrong at a property and show up on an inspection report, what worried you the most based on your knowledge of houses and how they operate or their construction?
Well, I guess the biggest thing would be structural issues. But then there's also, you have to look at safety issues. There's structural issues like Walls deflecting, which means, on a block wall in the basement, it's getting pushed in and buckling. That's a huge problem and very expensive fix. Also, safety issues, electrical issues. If I've seen some panels that, are outright dangerous, as well as decks ready to collapse. So pointing out main issues like that are safety or foundational issues, that's, probably the main thing that would be a real problem.
Does water scare you?
Always, but you got to gauge on what it is. If I go into, an 1880 farmhouse, of course it's going to have a damp basement. You expect that. It's lime mortar and that sort of thing. So water is an issue on a lot of houses, on a newer house, and quite often water issues are a direct result of improper grading outside. So it's pointing out the issues, recommend repair. In some cases, it is what it is. Some cases, it's something that needs to be fixed with a French drain or grading issues.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you brought up, like, say, the age of the house, right? Because when I do take clients out to properties, we talk about that all the time, right? If I'm going to show an old farmhouse to a client, of course, I'm going to point out, well, you should expect at least the basement to be damp, if not a little bit wet, when you're showing an old farmhouse that was built in 1840 and has a stone foundation and a dirt floor, right? Like, the water table is most likely probably going to be a little bit of an issue. And you know what? Again, I just want to bring this up because I'm gonna kind of stand on my soapbox a little bit here. I had a property. I'm still mad at this. I had a property that I showed a client earlier this year. It was in Berks County, and it was a farm. And there was an old farmhouse. There was a big bank barn on the property. The farmhouse was probably from about 1890. There was a bank barn that seemed to appeared, I want to use that word again, appeared to have a structural issue. It appeared that there was a rotten beam in the basement that looked to be holding some things up structurally, looked to be eaten away by termites. It had a buried oil tank in the property, which to me is a big no-no. Had an on-site septic system, on-site well, had pretty much everything that could cost you a ton of money had going on at this property. My client still loved it. We put in an offer. We wanted to do inspections to make sure everything was, on the up and up there. And wouldn't you know it, somebody completely waived their inspections on a property like this. It blew my mind. It made me so angry. I can't even, to me, that's like malfeasance, right? That's almost like, neglect for your clients. I guess my question is, what would make you yourself walk away from a property? Is there anything that would scare you away personally from buying a home? And what do you think about people that do stuff like that would completely waive their inspection on a property like that?
You start with the big ticket items, of course, roof, foundation, septic. Those are the big ones. And if I see something that's obvious, a problem with any one of those things, either walk away or get a huge deduct on the house. That's the stuff that would really scare me. I've seen foundation walls buckled. I've seen main beams that were nearly eaten away. And those are the sort of things. A huge house with a roof then the roof looks like potato chips. That's going to be an issue. That's going to be, $25,000 fix.
We can do anything with money, right? So I guess nothing can scare you away if you have enough money to deal with it and you love the property.
Correct.
But is there something that you yourself walking into somewhere, you're like, oh boy, I'm just not going to take this on, even with your background, in construction or, doing these kind of things? Is there something that's going to turn you away automatically and you just say, you know what, that's not worth my time?
Foundation issues are expensive, and that's the core of the building. That's what it's built on. So that would be the main thing I would say is the issue. Everything else, new electric service, new roof, you know, I almost guarantee that any house that has a septic system that's over 20 years is going to fail. That it's basically the way it is now because especially soil around here is clay and shale, nothing perks. So you're going to probably need a new system with a sand mound.
You know what? I just want to ask you a side question on that because, there are different types of on-site septic systems. Do you feel like one type of system is better than another? I had at one point in time, I sold an 1840s farmhouse that had a cesspool on the property that you would think would have failed 100 times over, right? By the time that we sold the property. The seller of the property was a chemist, and he claims that he came up with this certain type of caustic that he would pour down the septic system. And I have to tell you, the septic system was clean as a whistle. It was like 100 and something years old. Wow. And it was in perfect working condition. I could not believe it. So, I mean, do you feel like there are certain types of septic systems that you think are better than another?
Well, the newest one, the sand mound ones, is what people are putting in now because of the perk issues. Now, like you talked about a cesspool, that's a different animal because that's something that needs to be pumped out, and it's basically a big crock that bacteria takes down things, but eventually it has to be pumped out. Must admit, but a disclaimer here. Part of my inspections is not testing septic. We have a separate contractor that does that.
Yep.
So I'll recommend testing, but it's not by me.
Yeah. No, I know. I don't want to go down that road because I know I'm putting you in an uncomfortable place there. But we could get into the distribution boxes and perking and all that
grain fields and that sort of thing.
Grain fields, yeah. So all right. So back to showing properties, right? Mm-hmm. So as an agent, if I'm showing a property to clients for the first time, and from an inspector's trained eye walking into the property, what do you think that I or another agent should be on the lookout for first when it comes to the condition or state of a property? Is there something that, I know you're an expert and you talk about, say, like foundational issues, right? But, typically what I look for when I'm out on a property, is there a water stain on the ceiling, right? Is there, how much water is in the sump pump? Is there certain types of cracks within the walls of the property or the foundation of the property? What the state of the windows, how old are the windows in the property? Big ticket items. What's the roof like? Is there something that you think we need to look out for if I'm walking into a home for the first time?
Foundation walls for cracks. A rule of thumb is vertical crack usually isn't a big problem. Horizontal is.
Okay, that's a great tip right there.
Yeah, and if you see ceiling stains on the ceiling, second floor, of course, that's probably a past or present roof leak. That's why attic inspections are very important. Not only do you look for roof leaks, you look to see if there's insulation and condensation problems, and to see if there's a stain, why did it happen. First floor stains, ceiling stains are generally bathroom leaks, and that sort of thing, and see if it's a past or present leak. That's why inspectors always have moisture meters with them to see if it's active or not active leak. Generally, in basement, just look at wiring and piping is real important to look at. Old wiring, knob and tube, which is pre-1940. That's a problem, and a lot of times you won't be able to get insurance with that. Cast iron piping, I would note it on a report. It will eventually have to be replaced because they fail over time. And that's general things. And age of heater, of course, age of water heater. There are all general things you have to look at.
So let me ask you a question, and let me put this disclaimer out there. This is just your personal feeling. All right. Okay. All right. This is not something that agents should, take as gospel. But where do you fall on radon and levels of radon, say, in a basement? Because obviously, 4.0 picocuries or picocuries, is where Pennsylvania falls, right? I think in Canada it's either 6 or 8, I want to say, is considered to be safe.
And Europe is much higher than that.
Yeah. So where do you fall on the meter of everything? We have properties, they test it like 3.9 or 4.1,
Right.
and it's either safe or now you have to put in a system. Where do you fall with radon in general?
Well, since I'm retired, I could talk frankly.
Yes, please do. And again, I'm putting this disclaimer out there. This is just your personal feeling.
My personal opinion is there's radon everywhere. And generally speaking, the tighter the house, the more chances of high radon. A newer house, they're sealed very well. They got very efficient windows, whereas my house is 160 years old, no chance of radon just because it has so many leaks in it. But it's not as much of a worry to me. It seems like they go through waves of what to worry about, whether it's lead, asbestos, radon. There's always some mold. There's always something to be afraid of. And to be honest with you, radon is one of my major things to be afraid of.
Yeah, see, I feel as though you felt that way. But I know you can't say anything. But it's interesting to get, your perspective, and your perspective is just one perspective. But I do wonder about the arbitrary, or maybe it's not arbitrary. I'm sure they have their reasons, but it does seem like an arbitrary point of recommendation for remediation, right?
Yes.
So that always I always wanted to get your take on that, now that we're kind of off the record, off the clock, So, okay. So my next question is to you. Speaking of things that come up on inspection reports a whole heck of a lot, have you ever found a home that was graded properly or had an anti-tip bracket actually installed on a range?
But both of those things would be an exception. I'd say 90% of houses that, are graded improperly and don't have an anti-tip bracket. But I got to say, as an inspector, I always have to find something wrong. And it's the agent's job to help the customer choose their battles.
Yeah. And that is always a unique proposition, especially for first-time home buyers, right? Yeah. And so as agents, I think we have to set the expectation going into the inspection itself. Let's focus on the major stuff in the house, right? Whether it's going to cost a lot of money or it's going to be a safety hazard. That's typically, let's keep everything in perspective. If there is a light bulb that's out, or there happens to be a dent in the front door, let's not focus on those things as much as the structural stuff, the water stuff, the electrical stuff, all that good stuff.
Exactly.
I think sometimes our buyers, and again, they're buying a huge asset. It's a lot of money, but sometimes we let them get carried away with stuff, and we have to kind of rein them back in a little bit. All right. So what is the strangest thing that you've seen during your time of doing home inspections? I'm sure you've seen some wild stuff out there, just like we have. What's the strangest thing you ever came across?
Strangest. There's a lot of them have to do with critters. Being greeted by a family of raccoons in an attic, or finding an electrocuted mouse in a breaker panel.
Oh my God!
Yeah, there's stuff like that you see all the time.
So do you see? I mean, speaking of like the animal thing, when I bought my first home in the attic, there was probably every animal imaginable living in my attic. There was bats, squirrels, probably a zebra living up there. There was like holes in the eaves that they were getting into.
Yes.
And showing properties in different places, unfortunately, have seen, like you had mentioned, some dead animals, all that kind of stuff. Have you ever come across I recently, an agent was talking about that there was a property that had a secret or false wall that you turned a bookcase and you ended up in what was kind of like a panic room or maybe just a secret room in general that they wanted nobody to know about. Have
Yeah,
you
I've
ever
seen a
come
couple.
across anything like that?
I've seen a couple of them. One, you're right. A bookcase was moved as a door to get into another small room. I don't know what exactly its purpose was, but it was cool. I like it.
I kind of do want to put one of them in my house just to say I have one, Uh, so I can assume that there's been a lot of stuff in your travels that kind of have made you scratch your head, I'm sure. So all right, so I wanted to get on with my last question here. And I think this is the best question of the bunch to ask you because we all know how it is to have parents or relatives as deal killers show up to properties, and we're like, oh my God, they brought their whole family, they brought their parents, and how is this gonna work out for us, right? So, last question: do you disassociate from your body when buyers' parents show up to the home inspection? What's your coping mechanism when somebody's uncle tries to show you that they know more than you at a home inspection?
Tact is something that's really important as an inspector because you're right. You do have resident experts or family experts coming with you, and I found the best way to deal with it is just talk turkey with them. If they want to say something specific, I can say yes, but in this case, and usually you could disarm them a bit, if you hear what they're saying and talk reason and tact, is best thing I could say is don't get upset because that exacerbates the situation.
That's why I always liked you, Steve. And before you were in the business, I worked with an inspector who shall remain nameless. And the reason why I actually started using you, and this is in all seriousness, was because I noticed that my previous inspector would get very ornery when anybody's parents showed up to an inspection or any relative. And the breaking point was he was just flat out rude to one of my clients' parents, got really, really upset, got angry, and really insulting. And I know I could no longer use him as inspections or at inspections. And he was a good inspector, but you're so right. The way that you treat people intact is a big part of what we deal with from an agent perspective. We rely on you to have that tact going through the property,
Right. Another important aspect of being an inspector is my job is to point out what's wrong, but don't go overboard and be doom and gloom and say, oh my gosh, look at this.
Yep.
Basically temper it with, yes, this needs attention, but can be fixed rather easily.
Yeah. We always talk in our industry. Well, this guy's an alarmist, right?
Yeah.
And it's very important to us to have that kind of, you're not lying about anything. You're just the perspective, is really important when it comes to that kind of thing. And, I did say that was my last question, but I wanted to follow up with you about that tact and about, this kind of fits into that mold a little bit, is that you and I were talking before we came on camera about, now there's some inspectors that will do this, some that won't, some have decided not to do this moving forward, but certain inspectors will put estimates for repairs on the inspection report. And I know that for years, the company that you worked for did do that. But I always said, let's just use this as a guide. This is not the exact estimate. We can't really work off of these numbers. We have to have somebody come out and give us an actual estimate. How do you feel about putting pricing on your inspection reports for certain items in the house?
It is very helpful for the customer to gauge how bad things are, how much it's going to cost them to retrofit things. in the last couple of years of work when I was an inspector, we discontinued putting pricing in just because of the liability issue. Lawsuits could happen if you underestimate or something. And there was even a disclaimer that used to be on there saying, look, if there's any hidden problems in there that would make it more, it is what it is. So toward the end, we didn't give prices. However, I did tell customers off the record, I could say what I thought it would cost, but I would not put it in writing.
Yeah, I mean, we all know once you put something in writing, there's a whole lot of bad stuff that can happen, unfortunately,
Exactly.
for both of us. It's one of those things that I always felt, I always liked it, but I always wanted to preface it by saying, like, this is not gospel. We can't take this and then automatically go to the high end of the range, because in some of those cases, like, the range is pretty significant, right? You might be talking about a couple $1,000s in the range, right? Or even
exactly. Depends what it is. You don't know what you're going to come up with. Does the whole chimney need to be replaced, or can you just do some mortar work on it?
Yeah. And so I and I always felt like the buyers, of course, wanted to go to the high end of the range. The sellers wanted to go to the low end of the range. And that was yet another reason to have somebody come out and give you an exact estimate to work off of. Anyway. All right. Well, with that said, it's always good to see you again. I'm glad that you are enjoying your retirement and getting stuff done around the property, I know you always have projects on hand, but anytime I hear your voice, it's always good to hear you and to see you over Zoom right now. So, Steve, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's always good to catch up with you. And like I said, I owe you a beer for doing this.
Yeah, a pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Thanks, Steve. I'll talk to you soon.
See you, Jason.
That was the conversation with Steve Hendricks this week. Steve's a great guy and shared his unique perspective on doing home inspections, coming straight from the mouth of a home inspector. Here are a couple takeaways that I had with my conversation with Steve this week. Number one, just like all of you out there that are listening that have been through the rounds with home inspections, we have to set the expectation with our clients, because although we may be very well versed in doing home inspections, they often are not. And so just like a lot of other aspects of real estate, we have to set that expectation with our client. What is this home inspection going to look like? What is it about? And what should I look for in terms of what I'm going to ask for to be repaired? What's important when you look at a home inspection report? Because home inspectors have to disclose everything under the sun, right? They're going to look for things to be wrong with the property. And so much of our job should be focused on, when it comes to the home inspection, focusing on the items of safety, of big material defects, and those things that are going to cost your clients a lot of money. So I believe that having a conversation about the nuance of the home inspection prior to the home inspection taking place is critical for you and your clients. Number two, and I don't mean to sound preachy about this, but pay attention during the home inspections, right? I feel like there's a lot of times where we get distracted in talking to our clients, or we're not following around the home inspector in the property. Maybe we may, get a phone call and we think we need to step out. I think paying attention during that home inspection is so critically important, because number one, we learn about properties that way, right? But number two, it may help us negotiate further down the line here with the listing agent, because there may be some section of that home inspection that we particularly need to pay attention to, because we need, again, the nuance of that home inspection to be able to explain to the listing side, well, it came up in the inspection report this way, but this is what the inspector meant by that. And I think that is so important when negotiating our contracts and getting past the inspection period. Every little bit of information counts and can be used to help us save a transaction. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, and this came up late in the conversation with Steve, is talking about estimates that are on home inspection reports. Not all home inspectors will put estimates for fixes on an inspection report, but if they do, please do not use that estimate as gospel, right? We have to have the experts come out. You wouldn't go to a general practitioner, go to a doctor, and they say something's wrong with your heart, right? and they'll say, you need to go to the expert. You need to go see a cardiologist. The same goes for inspections. If they put that the electrical estimate is, $1,000 to $2,000, well, there's a big gap there. So you need to have an electrician come out and actually give you a proposal on what the exact amount it's going to be to fix that problem. The estimate of costs on a home inspection report should strictly only be used as a guide, a good guide, but just a guide. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. I thank you for listening. We will be back in another couple of weeks with a new topic, a new guest. And if you want to hear about something that we haven't covered yet, again, please reach out to me, jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And if you haven't liked and subscribed to our podcast or left us a review yet, please do so. It helps us to reach more people. Once again, this is Jason Ostrowski saying stay safe out there, stay selling, and I'll catch you on the next episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast.